Get ready to dive into the story. Let's jump right in! The story starts with a group of men wearing white clothes, working hard to dig and prepare the ground. Someone shouts, asking for water. Then they spread straw over the field. Several men line up, carrying buckets, while another man stands on a small cliff, yelling at them like they are slaves, ordering them to hurry up. Nearby, a goblin writes something down in a book held by one of the workers. One of the men feels the sharp pain of the whip hitting his back again and again, mixing blood and sweat all over his body. He mutters about how painful and cruel this life of endless labor is. Far away from this, there was once the strongest man on earth who became a champion at only 27 years old. He stayed at the top for 2 years. In a big fight, when the towel was thrown into the ring, the referee ended the match. The winner, with 23 wins and no losses, became the heavyweight champion of the biggest MMA league in the world. He even defended his title once before retiring undefeated. That man was Cho Hyun-suk, a famous athlete from South Korea, and the main character of this story. However, not long after his retirement, he met an unexpected end. He was hit by the well-known truck Kun. As you might guess, the truck ended his life. While floating between life and death, Hyun-suk sadly thought about all the money he had saved for retirement, now completely useless. Fighting had been his whole life. To make it worse, he was still single and had never even dated. Even 30 minutes after dying, he kept being dramatic, but slowly, his mind changed. He realized he wouldn't have to train or fight anymore. There were no matches to stress over. He also felt a little relief, knowing he had no family or close friends who would be hurt by his death. While he floated in the strange space, a hand suddenly reached out to him. It belonged to a beautiful angel, who said sorry for being late. She called Hyun-suk an SSS rank hero and said her name was Rachel. Her job was to recruit people who had died. Hyun-suk, confused and embarrassed, turned red, especially after noticing her chest. He got even more flustered when Rachel grabbed his hand. Hyun-suk asked for an explanation, and Rachel told him he had 2 choices. The first was to accept death and wait for another life, likely coming back as a poor, lonely old man. The second was to come back to life right away as a hero in a world that needed saving. To make the second option more tempting, Rachel showed him visions of many beautiful women. Feeling nervous and not ready, Hyun-suk said he needed some time to think. Everything was happening too fast, and he didn't have enough information. Rachel gently pushed him, asking if he really wanted to throw away such a once-in-a-lifetime chance. She talked about all the rewards he would get: money, fame, beautiful women, and special privileges. But as Rachel kept talking, Hyun-suk had already stopped listening. He was deep in thought. If he became a hero, it meant he would have to fight again, something he had just retired from. Waiting for reincarnation seemed much easier and more peaceful. Seeing that he wasn't excited, Rachel decided to try harder. She told him that in the other world, the village chief would greet him warmly, even running barefoot to meet him. They would feed him, treat him well, and give him easy quests to complete. Rachel even said the chief might offer him his daughter, known as the most beautiful girl in the village. Still, Hyun-suk's face didn't change, and Rachel started to worry about losing her bonus for failing to recruit him. So, she changed her approach. Pretending to give up, Rachel said maybe Hyun-suk should just accept being a lonely old man. That got his attention. To push even harder, she added something scary: he might not even be reborn as a human in his next life. This hit Hyun-suk hard. As Rachel turned to leave, he quickly grabbed her leg and shouted that he would take the hero offer. Rachel acted cool and asked him to say it again. Hyun-suk held on tighter and yelled that he agreed to become a hero. Rachel smiled happily and said they would start right away. Confused, Hyun-suk asked what she meant. Suddenly, a bright magic circle appeared under his feet. He tried to protest, saying he wasn't ready yet, but it was too late. Rachel told him the beautiful new world was already waiting for him. She wished him good luck, even though she grumbled about how much trouble he had caused her. Right then, Rachel got a call. She answered and reported that the new hero, number 137, 421, Hyun-suk, had finished his transfer. Meanwhile, Hyun-suk fell unconscious. Later, He heard someone telling him to wake up. He wondered if it was the village chief Rachel had mentioned. Maybe the one with the beautiful daughter. It seemed like the story was going as planned, until, suddenly, a punch hit him hard in the stomach, snapping him awake. Angry, Hyansuk shouted back, asking if the person had a death wish. But when he looked up, he froze. The figure in front of him didn't look human at all. It wore a wild boar skull with horns on its head. The strange creature looked very angry, accusing Hyansuk of being lazy in the slave dormitory. Hyansuk stood there, completely confused. Was this scary-looking creature the village chief Rachel had talked about? That couldn't be right. The creature looked more like a monster Hyansuk was supposed to fight. Nervously, he introduced himself as a hero. The monster looked confused, then came closer, laughing and saying that heroes these days must be really dumb. Hyansuk started to feel that something was seriously wrong, but he tried to trust that Rachel wouldn't lie to him. Maybe this monster was just his first quest. Trying to stay calm, he decided to act tough, like a true Korean would. Before he could think more, the creature asked him to repeat what he said. Without a second thought, Hyansuk kicked the monster and shouted for it to die. He felt proud for a moment, until the creature grabbed his foot easily. The monster smirked and asked if Hyansuk really thought he was a hero. Sounding tired, it complained about how annoying all these so-called heroes were and wondered where they kept coming from. Before Hyansuk could react, the creature clenched its fists and told him he'd sleep better after a nap. With that, it tossed Hyansuk into a dark underground prison. As Hyansuk tried to adjust to the darkness, he heard loud banging nearby. Someone was shouting outside the door, demanding another round with the cow-headed monster. The door creaked open, and a fat goblin with a sword stormed in. The goblin yelled at the noisy prisoner and threatened to boil him into soup if he didn't shut up. Scared, Hyansuk quickly promised to stay quiet. After the goblin left, Hyansuk sat there complaining to himself about this so-called beautiful world. He wondered what had gone so wrong. His biggest worry now? That he would die a virgin here too. Suddenly, a voice called out to him through a small window in the cell. The voice asked if he was new. Curious, Hyansuk asked who it was. The man on the other side said he was a senior hero who was getting ready to leave soon. He explained that they were trapped inside the Demon King's army fortress, where humans were made into slaves. Peeking through the window, Hyansuk was shocked to see another Korean. He respectfully called the man his sonbai and asked how things had gotten this bad. The man laughed at Hyansuk's polite tone and teased him before shouting to the other prisoners, asking if any of the self-proclaimed heroes were still alive. Suddenly, voices came from all over, claiming to be heroes too. The place was full of people who had ended up just like him. Hyansuk, confused, asked what was going on. The Sunbae explained casually that there were at least 100 heroes stuck here in the Demon King's fortress. He pointed out the cow-headed monster Hyansuk had seen was Reborn, the boss of the fortress, and the goblin was Jark, a cruel prison guard. Finally, the man told him the most shocking truth: it was all Rachel's fault. Hyansuk's face twisted in shock as the man cursed Rachel, calling her a wicked demon. The Sunbai spoke with a bitter voice, saying things might have turned out differently if not for Rachel's mistake. Hyansuk, growing more and more panicked, demanded to know what he meant. Weren't they supposed to begin their journey somewhere better than this nightmare? The man nodded grimly. He explained that some heroes he had met told him about the proper starting points. Peaceful towns or quiet villages where they could safely begin, even if they didn't have powers right away. Realization hit Hyansuk hard. The reason he had ended up in this terrible place wasn't bad luck. It was because of that so-called angel, Rachel. He could still remember her smiling face clearly, and the anger inside him boiled. A few days later, we see the 2nd Slave Squad of the 3rd Battalion, part of the Demon King's army. Humans were being forced to work endlessly under the cruel watch of goblin overseers. They were even made to chant, "Let's crush the humans. Let's devour the humans," while working. Hyansuk's whole body ached with exhaustion. Struggling under a massive log, he felt the extra weight of a lazy goblin sitting on top of it like it was nothing. Finally, a bell rang, signaling the end of the day's work. The goblin barked an order for them to return to their cells. Back inside his prison cell, Hyansuk thought to himself that, strangely enough, the prison almost seemed better than working outside. He remembered how Rachel had promised him special privileges for being a hero. Trying something he had seen in stories, Hyansuk called out, "Status window." To his surprise, it actually worked. A window popped up showing his stats. As he stared at the numbers, he learned some basic things about his strength and stamina. He muttered about what he saw without thinking, catching the ear of the man in the next cell. The man was surprised and asked if it was true that Hyansuk already had stamina at level 1. Hyansuk confirmed it and added that his strength stat was 28. The man, remembering that Hyansuk was a famous fighter, was amazed. Stats over 30 at level 1 were unheard of here. But Hyansuk just shrugged it off. He said he was still just a slave, no matter what the numbers said. The man, still hopeful, told him that with stats like that, escaping and becoming a real hero was definitely possible. Hyansuk, not really convinced, pretended to sleep. But deep down, he couldn't stop worrying about how low his level was. Would it really be enough? Late at night, once the man next door started snoring, Hyansuk quietly opened his status window again. He noticed 2 new things: mana, which could boost physical strength, and something called hero points. He realized the other heroes didn't know about hero points, probably because none of them had earned any yet. Just then, a soft glow filled the cell, and Rachel reappeared, looking as mischievous as ever. She flashed a teasing smile, pouting playfully as she greeted him with a cheerful, "Long time no see." Before she could say anything else, Hyansuk grabbed the tiny Rachel tightly with both hands, his face full of frustration. He told her coldly that he didn't want to hear about hero points or anything else she had to say. At that moment, Hyansuk wasn't interested in hero talk. He just wanted to give Rachel a piece of his mind. Before long, Rachel found herself tied up, hanging awkwardly like bait dangling from a fishing rod. She quickly tried to explain herself, saying the teleportation error had been caused by an accident. She'd spilled coffee over the magic circles during a snack break. As she spoke, she activated a soundproof barrier to keep their conversation private. Hyansuk asked if getting stuck with him was her punishment. Rachel clarified that it wasn't exactly a punishment. She had been assigned as his personal fairy, meant to guide him until he eventually defeated the Demon King. But Hyansuk made it clear he had no interest in being a hero anymore. Rachel, confused, asked him what he meant. Hyansuk explained that he had no plans to fight the Demon King or save the world. He just wanted a peaceful life this time. Rachel admitted that many heroes chose that path, but reminded him that he had been evaluated as an SSS, ranked individual, a truly rare talent. Hyansuk wasn't impressed. He said that having potential didn't mean he had any obligation. Fighting had never been his calling, no matter what others thought. When Rachel tried to argue, Hyansuk cut her off sharply. He said he was tired of living a life full of battles, tired of endlessly fighting, just because he was good at it. Rachel was taken aback. She had always thought of him as another reckless fighter who only cared about battles and women. Her thoughts drifted back to the day she received her assignment. She had protested fiercely, insisting it was unfair for someone of her high status to be forced into the humiliating job of a personal fairy. But the decision had been final. She was ordered to support Hyansuk in everything, no matter what happened. Sharing both his victories and defeats was now her duty. She had been sent straight to the demon fortress without even a chance to complain further. Back in the present, Hyansuk figured out that a personal fairy had to follow the hero's commands. Smirking to himself, he ordered Rachel to help him escape. Rachel clearly hated the idea, but she agreed because she had no choice. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside the cell. Acting fast, Hyansuk grabbed Rachel and hid her. Goblin guards were waking up the prisoners for another day of harsh labor. Rachel grumbled under her breath, saying she could have hidden herself better with stealth magic if he hadn't interfered. Even after the morning roll call ended, Hyansuk noticed that Jark, the nasty goblin guard, was hanging around near his cell. Before he could wonder why, Jark barked out that Ran, the warden, had summoned him. In Ran's office, Hyansuk braced for bad news, but Ran surprised him. Apparently, Hyansuk's hard work had been noticed. Still carrying the awful stench of goblin breath, Ran said that when Hyansuk first arrived, he thought he was just another crazy human. But seeing him work hard changed Ran's opinion. That was why Ran had a new proposal. He wanted Hyansuk to become the head slave. Hyansuk blinked, confused by the strange title. Ran explained that with work slowing down, they needed someone to manage the human slaves. And Hyansuk was the best candidate. Rachel anxiously prayed that Hyansuk would turn down the offer without hesitation. She whispered fiercely, practically hissing at him to refuse. In a fit of panic, she even yelled that a hero should never submit to officers serving the Demon King. Hearing the outburst, both Ran and Jark turned their heads, suspicious. Quickly, Hyansuk covered the situation by shouting that he would make sure the humans worked even harder from now on. To sell it, he bowed deeply, slamming his forehead against the desk with a loud thud. Ran burst out laughing, clearly impressed. He admitted that although he hadn't thought much of Hyansuk at first, he was starting to like him. Ran even said that if Hyansuk kept up the good work, he'd personally recommend him for a position in the Demon King's army. Dismissed from the office, Hyansuk trudged away, feeling crushed inside. His grand escape plans were falling apart before his eyes. Days later, the forced labor continued, with humans chanting work songs under the goblins' cruel supervision. Hyansuk strolled around the worksite, now wearing the air of a petty supervisor. When one man lagged behind, Hyansuk shouted mockingly, "Even my grandma runs faster than you." His behavior was so in sync with the goblins that he looked like he belonged among them. As he barked orders, a system window flashed before him. Charisma has increased through leadership experience. Feeling pleased, Hyansuk puffed up his chest and exclaimed loudly that being head slave wasn't so bad after all. The other prisoners stared at him with wide, worried eyes, exchanging whispers. Clearly, they thought he had completely lost his mind. Meanwhile, Rachel scolded him harshly, warning that this foolishness would only get them into even deeper trouble. But Hyansuk just brushed her off with a smug grin. "A little sparrow like you can't possibly understand the grand strategies of a phoenix," he said arrogantly. When one exhausted man collapsed to his knees, Hyansuk barked at him mercilessly. Moments later, another system notification appeared. "Redran's favorability toward you has increased." Delighted, Hyansuk gave an exaggerated salute, thanking Redran loudly and pledging his loyalty. Rachel nearly exploded, furiously reminding him that he was supposed to be finding a way to escape, not climb the ranks inside the Demon King's fortress. Scratching the back of his head sheepishly, Hyansuk explained that he was just following the system's guidance. After all, wasn't that what heroes were supposed to do? Rachel, growing increasingly desperate, argued that buttering up the Demon King's officers was completely absurd. No hero quest had ever worked like this. Still unfazed, Hyansuk pointed to the system window and offered to read it aloud. "You who ended up trapped here because of some idiot's mistake," he began. Rachel immediately cut him off, fuming that system messages should never use slangy, informal language like that. Proper system text was always formal and neutral. Hyansuk just shrugged. Maybe, he suggested cheekily, SSS-level heroes had different rules. She remembered the previous night's argument vividly. Rachel had thrown a tantrum over Hyansuk's easy acceptance of the head slave title. He had simply snapped back, calling her the crazy one, not himself. Out of nowhere, a strange system alert had popped up. "You who have been dragged into the Demon King's fortress thanks to an idiot's mistake," feeling as frustrated as someone finding an empty toilet paper roll. "Remember, this is still your chance to become a true hero." The system message had been clear. Earn the favor of Officer Redran and collect 100 hero points. At the time, Hyansuk had been left speechless, but he quickly realized this bizarre path was the only real option available to him. Now, back on the worksite, Hyansuk marched alongside the other slaves, leading them in a rousing chorus of the Demon King's Third Army Corps anthem. Rachel, watching from the sidelines, was baffled. She knew that only high-ranking individuals could tamper with a hero's quest objectives. Why would anyone go to such lengths for Hyunsuk? Before she could find an answer, Jark appeared once more, barking at Hyunsuk to come with him to Redrun's office. Inside, Redrun greeted him warmly, showering him with praise for the remarkable boost in slave productivity. Feigning modesty, Hyunsuk bowed low and humbly credited all the success to Redrun's brilliant leadership. Rachel, muttering under her breath, scoffed that such cheap flattery would never work. Yet to her astonishment, Redrun's face visibly twitched with pleasure, clearly soaking up every word. Moments later, a system notification blinked into view. Quest completed, earn Officer Redrun's favor. 100 hero points acquired. Hyunsuk and Rachel exchanged stunned glances. Neither had expected it to be that easy. Now armed with his first batch of hero points and access to the beginner hero store, Hyunsuk knew it was time to kick off the next stage of his plan. Without hesitation, he turned to Redrun and requested permission to train the slaves. Redrun frowned suspiciously, questioning the need for such a move. Hyunsuk, ever the smooth talker, painted a vivid picture. A battalion of perfectly disciplined slaves, working with such efficiency that one man could do the work of three. He promised that, with proper training, the fortress could be completed in record time. Still skeptical, Redrun pointed out that human bodies were too frail for additional training atop their grueling labor. But Hyunsuk pressed on, suggesting that if the plan succeeded, Redrun would surely receive personal commendation from the higher command. The mention of praise was enough. Redrun, clearly swayed by the temptation, approved the request without much further thought. Later that night, back in their cell, Rachel was in full meltdown mode. She threw her hands in the air dramatically, wailing that Hyunsuk had completely lost his mind. Not only had he joined the Demon King's army, but now he was actively helping to strengthen it. Her hopeless moaning echoed off the cold walls. Annoyed, Hyunsuk snapped at her to quit her whining. He assured her he wasn't some fool blindly playing along. Still unconvinced, Rachel asked sharply if he was just trying to make a mockery of her. Quick as ever, Hyunsuk quipped back. "Why would I need to? You're doing a fine job yourself." Then, he dropped the real bombshell. He revealed that his goal wasn't to support the demons. It was to organize the slaves into an army and spark a rebellion. Hyunsuk explained that around 3,000 human slaves were crammed into the fortress, while only about 500 demon soldiers were stationed there. Even better, a human alliance base was located nearby. In the chaos of an uprising, they could send a request for reinforcements. Hearing this, Rachel's despair melted into awe. Her eyes sparkled with admiration as she realized he wasn't nearly as reckless as she thought. Excited now, Hyunsuk decided to check out the rewards from his completed quest. Rachel, still suspicious, crossed her arms and asked if he was absolutely sure he had earned real hero points, or if he'd just been hoodwinked by some twisted system. Hyunsuk reassured Rachel firmly, insisting that everything he said was the truth. To prove it, he revealed that the hero's store had officially unlocked. Hoping for something useful, maybe even a real hero skill, he eagerly opened the store menu with high expectations. This, he thought, might finally be his lifeline. But when the list of available skills appeared, Hyunsuk froze in disbelief. There, proudly displayed, were skills like breath holding, which improved how long one could hold their breath, and Iru bowel holding, a skill designed to help endure bowel pressure for longer periods. Hyunsuk couldn't help but mutter sarcastically that bowel holding should have been rated SSS rank. Especially handy in real-world emergencies. The rest of the available skills weren't any better. Basic domestic tasks like cooking, cleaning, and laundry filled the screen. Baffled and furious, Hyunsuk demanded to know how these pathetic options could possibly be considered heroic skills. Rachel, unable to contain her laughter, explained between giggles that the store was only level 1. She promised that as he earned more points and leveled up, more powerful and fitting abilities would unlock. Still burning with frustration, Hyunsuk snapped at her to shut up, calling her a swindling fairy without hesitation. The next day, the slaves lined up once again, raising their hands to salute the demon king under Hyansuk's command. At his signal, they began their chant, singing proudly, "We, the great demon king's army, defeat humans, eat humans, forget all our suffering once we catch them." Nothing under the sky compares to the demon king's affection. Standing at a distance, Reborn watched the performance unfold, nodding with satisfaction at his decision to approve Hyansuk's training program. However, the calm didn't last. Suddenly, the door to Reborn's quarters flew open with a loud bang. Jark stumbled in, clearly panicked, delivering urgent news: the human army was advancing toward the fortress. Even worse, the 8th Division, the strongest local unit, had already fallen into an ambush and retreated. Jark warned that with the 8th Division defeated, it was only a matter of time before the human forces reached them. Despite the grim report, Reborn remained remarkably composed. He considered Jark's advice to evacuate but quickly shook his head. Declaring that wars were ultimately decided by supply lines, he emphasized that the first rule of survival was never to lose a competent supply officer. With that, Reborn ordered Jark to leave immediately, but announced that he himself had one final matter to handle before departing Hyansuk. Meanwhile, Hyansuk was busy reprimanding the slaves, questioning if they were truly ready to follow his command. Hearing the commotion from the main hall, he sighed, already suspecting that Reborn was coming to interrupt yet another training session. He quickly checked his status window. Although his skills had risen slightly, it still wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to spark a rebellion yet. Frustrated, Hyansuk mumbled under his breath, wishing for some sudden event that could dramatically boost his power. Before he could even finish the thought, Reborn suddenly landed beside him with a heavy thud. Startled, Hyansuk turned to see Reborn clapping a hand firmly on his shoulder. "We don't have time," Reborn said sharply. "You're coming with me. Right now." Still confused, Hyansuk asked where they were going and why, but Reborn, his face tense and hurried, offered no answers. Just then, the commander of the human army bellowed a rallying cry, commanding the troops to attack, declaring that victory was within their grasp. With renewed vigor, human soldiers armed with spears charged forward, piercing through several goblins standing in their path. Their momentum, however, came to an abrupt halt at the sight of something far more terrifying than they had anticipated: the Red Nightmare. Reborn. The commanders hastily shouted for the soldiers to retreat and let the knights handle the formidable foe. But the human troops, emboldened by their surge, continued charging ahead. Watching the chaos unfold, Hyansuk couldn't help but wonder, why are human forces here? An idea began to form in his mind. Maybe this was the opportunity he needed. Maybe he could use the battle to his advantage, stab the Demon King's officer in the back, and return to human society as a celebrated hero. Before he could act, one of the human soldiers roared, "Die, Red Nightmare," and lunged toward Reborn with alarming bravery. Without hesitation, Reborn caught the man by the head and crushed it effortlessly, leaving Hyansuk frozen in place, horrified by the brutal scene. Then, with fluid precision, Reborn unleashed his combat arts. He performed the 7th movement, slamming another soldier's face into the ground, and followed it immediately with a devastating explosive destruction wave. The earth cracked and shattered under the impact, sending the human soldiers flying like broken dolls. Turning back calmly, Reborn asked, "Are you all right?" Instinctively, Hyansuk saluted and replied that he was fine, quickly adding in a subtle mumble that he'd be leaving soon. This exchange firmly reminded Hyansuk he was standing next to one of the Demon King's most terrifying elites. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, the humans had managed to claim a central area. They raised 2 flags high into the air and began organizing the liberated citizens from the Mariot Kingdom and the Drossen Empire. A human soldier questioned Hyansuk's prison mate, asking whether they were warriors. The man nodded without hesitation. Immediately, all those identified as warriors were separated from the other captives and led down a different path. Awaiting them was a figure who exuded authority: Olivane Grier, a middle-aged man with fiery red hair and a thick beard. He was none other than a duke of the Dresden Empire, and the commander of the Allied forces. A soldier approached him, saluting smartly, and reporting that the evacuation had been completed. Olivine praised the soldier for his efforts before turning his attention back to the situation. The soldier then mentioned that the so-called warriors had been gathered and drafted. Without a trace of hesitation, Olivine issued his next order: "L soldiers to your positions." And then, his voice dropped chillingly as he commanded, "Annihilate all the warriors before us." Elsewhere, a carriage rattled quietly through the dense forest. Inside, Hyansuk sat in sullen silence, feeling the weight of crushed dreams. His imagined second life, his adventure, all slipping away. Across from him, Reborn sat still and unreadable. Hyansuk couldn't help but glance at him, thinking how effortlessly Reborn had wiped out their pursuers without even breaking a sweat. They weren't being chased anymore. Rachel, trying to lift the heavy mood, piped up with a bright voice, reminding Hyansuk that moments of crisis often hide opportunities. She suggested they head to the Demon King Army's headquarters and properly assess the situation. Hyansuk, thoroughly unimpressed, snapped at her to shut up. The tense silence returned. Then, Reborn stirred slightly. "I must have fallen asleep for a moment," he admitted, rubbing his eyes. He turned to Hyansuk and asked calmly, "Did you say something?" Hyansuk quickly covered up, saying he had just been mumbling about how honored he felt to travel with someone like Reborn. Reborn, seemingly moved, nodded in appreciation. He informed Hyansuk that they were approaching the 3rd Corps headquarters and encouraged him to look forward to it. "Once we arrive," Reborn added, "I'll officially enlist you in the Demon King's army." Hyansuk turned pale but managed to mutter, "It's an honor." Rachel, too, silently panicked. At the headquarters, a guard announced Reborn's return, and the gates swung open. Reborn gestured for Hyansuk to follow, saying he'd take him straight to the commander. "Meeting the commander this soon is a great honor," he said, though his stiff posture suggested otherwise. He then warned Hyansuk to behave properly if he wanted to stay alive, reminding him of the old saying, "Even in a tiger's den, one can survive by keeping calm." Hyansuk braced himself and promised he wouldn't falter. When they reached the commander's door, Reborn announced himself and was allowed in. As the door opened, Hyansuk heard a woman's voice and wondered if the commander might be human. Before them sat a striking woman. Long ears, claw-like nails, and her eyes hidden. The skin on her jaw and neck was a different shade, adding to her strange, powerful aura. She lounged in her chair in high heels, radiating authority. "Welcome back, Reborn," she greeted with a smile. She noted he seemed to have gained even more muscle since their last meeting. This was Hemis, the commander of the Demon King Army's 3rd Corps. Reborn returned the compliment, saying her beauty had grown even more dazzling. Hyansuk blushed. He couldn't believe someone so stunning could be a commander. He offered a polite smile and thanked Reborn for his words, though inside he was panicking. Should he also compliment her? He struggled to decide. Reborn shifted the topic, expressing regret for failing to defend the fortress. Hemis dismissed the concern, saying the blame rested with the 8th Division commander. Her voice turned sharp. "I should have already made a bag out of his hide," she said coldly. Hyansuk's breath caught. Reborn added that the 8th Division commander had survived, but returned in disgrace. The weight of Hemis's presence was suffocating, more intense than anything Hyansuk had ever felt. He clenched his fists, doing his best to stop his hands from shaking. Changing the subject, Hemis turned her gaze to Hyansuk. Reborn introduced him as the human he had mentioned earlier and said he had brought him to officially enlist in the Demon King's army. Hemis stepped closer to examine him. "He's cute," she said casually. Then she smiled, adding that she was eager to see what he could do, especially since he was chosen by Reborn. Though flustered, Hyansuk managed to stammer that he would do his best. Hemis, however, eyed him critically and said, "With that body, you won't last long in the demon army." She turned to Reborn and asked if he agreed. Reborn nodded. "He'll be eaten alive by the others," he added. Reborn then noted how unusual it was for a human to join the demon army and asked for permission to personally train Hyansuk. Hemis immediately shut it down. Absolutely not, she replied firmly. She explained that Reed Run's time shouldn't be wasted on a human. Then, something unexpected happened. Hemis began to transform. Her head twisted into something like a flower. Only this one had teeth and a long tongue. Hyansuk's mouth fell open as she shoved her entire arm into her own mouth. Moments later, her face returned to normal, and in her arms was a black, dog-like creature. She informed Hyansuk that he would now be in charge of taking care of her pet. Despite its small size, the creature looked vicious. "This is Bobo," she said cheerfully. "Isn't he adorable?" Hyansuk, however, was silently panicking. It looked like something straight from the pits of hell. On top of that, in his native language, the name Bobo meant stupid, which made the situation feel even more surreal. Reed Run examined the creature and commented, "I can feel a massive amount of power inside it, even though it's still a baby." Hemis beamed at the compliment, clearly pleased. Hyansuk, however, stayed uneasy. Noticing his hesitation, Hemis narrowed her eyes and asked, "Don't you like it?" Hyansuk quickly corrected himself. "It's an honor to care for Bobo," he said with a forced smile. Satisfied, Hemis handed the creature over to him. "Bobo is still growing, so don't forget to feed him. He gets nasty when he's hungry," she warned. She also added that it had become difficult to assign new caretakers, because Bobo had eaten them all. Suddenly, Rachel's voice rang out, surprising everyone. She had just seen a new hero quest pop up in the system window, and couldn't hide her shock. Hyansuk quickly shushed her, worried that she might wake Bobo. The quest details appeared before him. Sue survived by earning Bobo's affection and secure a better future. Reward, 200 hero points. Hyansuk was stunned. Was his mission really to win over a commander's pet? Just then, the door creaked open and a goblin walked in, knocking on the frame. Hyansuk greeted it politely, though deep down he was nervous. Having a goblin as a companion only made him feel more like food than a soldier. Curious, he asked what had happened to Bobo's previous caretakers. The goblin responded bluntly, "There aren't any left. They're all dead." It explained that from now on, it would be their job to prepare meals for Bobo. "That's it?" Hyansuk asked, half hoping there was more. "Wes," the goblin replied. But before it could say anything else, a shadow fell over it. It was Bobo, licking the goblin's head. Terrified, the goblin clung tightly to Hyansuk's leg, begging for help. In a desperate attempt to save himself, the goblin even offered Hyansuk his food. But Hyansuk had had enough. "What are you doing?" he snapped. The goblin ignored him, fully aware that only one of them might make it out alive. Furious, Hyansuk grabbed the goblin and tossed him toward Bobo. "You're the one who's dying," he said coldly. As Bobo prepared to pounce, Hyansuk handed him the snack. Bobo's eyes lit up. Without a moment's hesitation, he devoured the goblin happily. Hyansuk and Rachel watched in silence as Bobo enjoyed his treat. Later, Rachel was seen running for her life, panicking as Bobo chased after her. "Help!" she cried out. But Hyansuk replied calmly, "You'd better not run too long. He'll get hungry again." That's when Hyansuk noticed something new. An item had appeared, an extra large bone. According to the description, it could attract and charm Kennedy-type monsters. It cost 30 hero points. Acting fast, he called out to Bobo and waved the bone. He tossed it, and Bobo's eyes sparkled with excitement before darting after it. Rachel, gasping for air from all the running, grumbled, "You should have found that sooner." Hyansuk shrugged, smugly replying, "That's why my brain doesn't miss the small stuff." He thought the rest of the quest would go smoothly, but he was wrong. Without warning, Bobo lunged at him, narrowly missing and tearing only the edge of his shirt. That's when realization struck him: the bone wasn't enough. Bobo needed real meat. Rachel looked at him half joking, half serious. "Are you really thinking of taking Bobo outside?" Feeling the pressure rise as Bobo bared his fangs again, Hyansuk shouted the first calming word that popped into his mind: "Walk." The change was instant. Bobo froze, his wild energy vanishing. In its place was cheerful tail, wagging in pure excitement. He even hugged Hyansuk, who let out a deep sigh of relief. Now outside, Hyansuk tried to find the kitchen, but he was completely lost. Bobo, full of energy, kept dragging him in different directions, making it even harder to navigate. Rachel scanned the area, but couldn't pick up the scent of any food. Then she spotted a goblin and suggested asking it for directions. Hyansuk approached. The goblin looked confused and horrified to see a human. As Bobo growled and reverted to his feral nature, the goblin froze in place. Hyansuk tried to calm the situation. "It's just Bobo's walk time," he explained. Still trembling, the goblin asked, "Why is a human walking Bobo?" Bobo licked the goblin's face, and Hyansuk quickly stepped in. "You can't eat him," he said firmly. He asked where the kitchen was. The goblin, clearly panicked, pointed to the left and bolted, sprinting away in fear. Rachel and Hyansuk stood there in silence for a moment, then burst out laughing. The goblin's reaction had been so dramatic, they couldn't help but wonder if he truly belonged in the demon army. When the latter faded, Hyansuk got serious again. It was time to find meat in the kitchen. But Rachel raised an important question. "So, are you planning to take care of a dog forever?" Hyansuk scoffed. "Of course not," he replied. He still had dreams to chase. But when he turned around, Bobo was gone. Panic surged through him. His face went pale. "Where the hell is that dog?" he shouted. Dread settled over Hyansuk. Bobo was a walking disaster. Looking away even for a second had been a mistake. Rachel scanned the area and pointed. "There!" she said. They spotted Bobo trotting back toward them. Hyansuk exhaled in relief. "You scared me half to death?" he scolded. Bobo returned happily, tail wagging, but blood dripped from his mouth, and his belly was visibly full. Then, a cry rang out nearby. "Commander Regis is dead." Shouts for revenge echoed across the air. Hyansuk froze in horror. Rachel's eyes widened. She pointed at Bobo and whispered, "He's the culprit." Before they could react, goblin soldiers appeared from every direction. Hyansuk and Rachel turned and bolted. As they ran, Rachel panted, "Are we about to die?" "Shut up and run!" Hyansuk snapped. They hit a dead end. Goblins surrounded them, shouting accusations. "I'll tear your arms off like chicken wings." One goblin roared. Another lamented. "He's already digested, I wonder how he would've tasted." A third threatened, "Let's rip them both apart and share the meat." Hyansuk forced himself to stay calm. "How dare you?" he shouted back, standing tall even while outnumbered. He needed a plan. Quickly, he lifted Bobo and addressed the mob. "Do you even know who the brave one is among us?" The goblins paused, confused, staring at Bobo, who they'd assumed was just some beast. Hearing their ignorance, Hyansuk's anger rose. "You fools! This adorable, yet deadly creature is Bobo." Some goblins hesitated. They vaguely remembered rumors of Commander Hemis' infamous pet. Still, most dismissed it as another lie from a desperate human. Hyansuk, undeterred, pressed on. "You can't recognize Bobo. That's a disgrace." The goblins stared in disbelief, uncertain now because of how confidently he spoke. Keeping his cool, Hyansuk gave Bobo a command. "Unleash your beast mode." Without delay, Bobo transformed. His form expanded, fangs bared, saliva dripping from his jaw as he snarled, ready to feast. "This is Bobo," Hyansuk said with icy finality. Then he gave the order, "Void him." Bobo roared and lunged. Blood splattered as his jaws clamped down on the nearest goblin, tearing him apart. Bones scattered. Screams faded into silence. Hyansuk watched the gruesome scene unfold and casually muttered, "A dog without a muzzle sure gets messy." When it ended, only bones remained. He turned to the other goblins and asked mockingly, "Anyone else doubt who Bobo is?" The goblins dropped to their knees, apologizing frantically. "We didn't know. We swear we didn't know it was really Bobo." Just then, a system notification appeared in front of Hyansuk. "Your overwhelming charisma has subdued multiple demons. Hidden stat charisma has increased." Hyansuk grinned in satisfaction, pleased by the recognition. But the moment was cut short by a new voice. Calm, commanding. Someone had arrived behind them, watching the aftermath. "Know what's all this noise about?" Commander Hemis stood before them, amused as she surveyed the bloody scene. She casually remarked that the cute little pup was causing quite a stir. Hyansuk's blood ran cold. Facing her in her office had been terrifying, but standing before her here in this mess was worse. She seemed entertained by how boldly he'd used her name and Bobo to save himself. Hyun-suk bowed low, admitting his offense, but her raised eyebrow confused him. She had actually meant to compliment him. She admired his clever thinking and quick tongue, traits she found rare among her brute force-driven soldiers. With a smirk, she told him he had guts. Hyun-suk stammered a thanks, still unsure if she was praising him or warning him. He explained how he thought the demon army often created chaos by relying too much on sheer power. When he asked what kind of trouble that caused, she just said he'd find out soon enough. Then she brought up something unexpected. She suggested he consider becoming an executive in the demon army. Hyun-suk was stunned. He didn't feel remotely qualified. But Hemis waved off his hesitation. She told him he couldn't rely on her name and Bobo forever. She explained the army's ranking was based on duels. Beat someone, and their rank was yours. She gave him a month to train and told him if he won, she'd offer him another month of protection. If he kept winning, he might even rise to the level of battalion commander. But when Hyun-suk asked what would happen if he lost, her answer was chilling. "You'll regret surviving," she said. Left with no real choice, he agreed. He even picked his opponent immediately. Rachel, watching nearby, sighed loudly, predicting his end in a month. Hyun-suk snapped at her, reminding her she was the one who claimed he had SS rank potential. Rachel shrugged, saying potential wasn't the same as a guarantee. Annoyed, Hyun-suk called her out for being a useless fairy. Just then, something else caught his eye. The doors ahead were streaked with blood. He wondered aloud if this really was the kitchen. Carefully, he pushed the door open. Inside stood a massive red-skinned ogre-like figure. The creature greeted him, recognizing him as the human the commander had mentioned, and introduced himself as Kulkin, the demon army's chef. Hyun-suk didn't enter, choosing to stay at the door. He explained that he was just looking for a snack for Bobo. Kulkin narrowed his eyes. He had realized that Bobo had a new caretaker. Still, he refused the request without hesitation. Hyun-suk stood stunned. Kulkin explained that his only order was to spare the human's life. Nothing more. Hyun-suk, desperate, asked if there was any way to work something out. He emphasized again that the food was for Bobo. After thinking for a moment, Kulkin offered a solution. If Hyun-suk really wanted meat, he'd have to hunt for it himself, just like the goblins did. Hyun-suk paled as he glanced at the goblins nearby, busy chopping up something that disturbingly resembled their own kind. A sinking feeling grew in his chest. Kulkin's idea of hunting was far more horrific than he had expected. Before long, Hyun-suk found himself standing before a massive, savage wild boar. He had been told that if he could kill it, this would be his dinner. Staring at the beast, he wondered how his life had ended up here. The same boar had already killed someone named Morgan. They called this activity a hunt, but the boar didn't act like prey. It just charged at anyone in sight. The demon cooks swore they would avenge Morgan, but to Hyun-suk, the scene looked more like a suicide mission. He muttered that it was hard to tell who was hunting who. Rachel, always practical, asked what their next move was. She even suggested they run. Hyun-suk shook his head. With so many goblins swarming the area, escape wasn't realistic. Still, he couldn't deny the danger he was in. He made up his mind to do something. But just then, Kulkin called out. Instinctively, Hyun-suk responded, assuming it was his turn. But to his surprise, Kulkin said the hunt was already over. Hyun-suk was stunned. He had assumed they were still recklessly charging at the boar. How had they brought it down so quickly? A nearby goblin gave Kulkin a report, 12 dead, and many more injured. Hyun-suk winced. That cost seemed far too high, but Kulkin didn't care. He called it an amazing result and announced a short break before the next hunt. Watching him, Hyun-suk saw clearly just how little the chef cared for the lives of his own allies. As the cook scrambled around, Hyun-suk spoke quietly to Rachel. He admitted that running away wasn't an option anymore. Rachel asked if he planned to join the monster hunts too. Hyun-suk immediately said no. He had no intention of throwing himself into the same madness. But he also knew he needed to level up, and for that, he needed experience points. Rachel agreed, but asked where he was going to find those in a place like this. shamelessly. Hyun-suk asked if he could still gain experience by landing only the final blow. Rachel confirmed it, though she called his plan disgraceful. That was all the confirmation he needed. Hyun-suk thanked her and said it was time to move. He knew his time was limited. If Commander Himmis was serious about her threats, then he had 1 month to grow stronger. Or die. With that in mind, he walked up to Kulkin again. This time, he declared his wish to participate in the next hunt. As a proud member of the demon army. Kulkin stared at him for a moment, making Hyun-suk nervous. Had he said too much? But then the chef grinned, clearly amused, and said he liked Hyun-suk's boldness. Hyun-suk, relieved, thanked Kulkin, slipping in a few compliments to further appease him. To his surprise, Kulkin assigned him the role of leading the next hunt. Kulkin explained that for their group, the leader's role was highly respected, typically reserved for exceptional cases. Hyun-suk, feigning humility, protested that he couldn't possibly stand before the noble demons, and suggested that the other cooks might object him taking charge. Kulkin, unfazed, gave him a simple thumbs up. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call for Kulkin. "What's wrong?" the chef asked. A cook reported a monster invasion, mentioning the sound of a monster's cry as a signal that an urn had arrived. Hyun-suk, confused, asked if they were in danger. Kulkin brushed off the concern, adding that N meat wasn't particularly good. Drawing a knife from his back, Kulkin rallied everyone to arm themselves, announcing that they would hunt the N and add its meat to the dinner menu. Hyun-suk saw this as an opportunity. If he stayed close and landed the final blow, he could gain more experience. Rachel handed him something. A system notification appeared, showing a slight boost to his health and strength for the next 3 minutes. Rachel confidently brushed off his thanks. But instead of thanking her back, Hyun-suk bonked her on the head, grumbling about why she hadn't used it on him earlier. With renewed focus, Hyun-suk sprinted to position himself for the last hit. As he ran, he forced himself to think about his goals. He imagined a noble lady, blonde and with bunny-like features, surrounded by 5 children, all living a peaceful life. He refused to die again as a defeated, loveless loser. With that determination, he leapt into the fray, punching the urn with all his might. The monster fell, and with its death, a flood of system notifications poured in. Hyun-suk was stunned to see his level rise by 4 from just 1 killing blow. At this rate, he realized he could hit level 20 in a single day. Feeling empowered, Hyun-suk was elated. Finally, he could grow stronger. Moments later, a trembling cook approached the dead urn with a butcher's knife in hand. Before the cook could act, Hyun-suk casually elbowed him, claiming his arm had slipped. Laughing maniacally, his grin wide and menacing, Hyun-suk declared that every last hit in the world was now his to claim. As time passed, more monsters were slain. Rachel, visibly drained, asked if they were done now. Hyun-suk smirked and praised his buffbot companion for her assistance. The monsters had been dealt with, and it seemed like the cooks had finished butchering the meat. However, upon closer inspection, Hyun-suk realized the cooks were already gorging themselves on the fresh meat. One of them even shouted for a larger serving, which left him utterly baffled. Kulkin noticed him staring and called out, asking what had caught his attention. Hyun-suk questioned whether it was acceptable for the cooks to indulge in the army's food like this. Kulkin responded nonchalantly, explaining that enjoying fresh monster meat was one of the cook's privileges, especially since it spoiled quickly. He added that for regular soldiers, having fresh meat was a rare and special opportunity. The chef even admitted that the joy of good food was the main thing keeping him going. A flood of questions raced through Hyun-suk's mind, like what kind of privilege this was and how they managed without a labor union. Despite his skepticism, Kulkin offered him a portion of the meat, saying he had earned it as a warrior. Hyun-suk hesitated, staring at the meat and thinking about how much the cooks had risked to get it. Eventually, he took a bite. The flavor wasn't bad. There was a strong smell that oddly enhanced the taste, but overall the meat was bland and chewy. Hyun-suk couldn't help but think that back in South Korea, this kind of meat wouldn't sell for long. It struck him then these cooks were risking their lives for mediocre meat. His thoughts shifted to a new idea. What if he could create a dish better than this? He realized that by doing so, he could win their loyalty through their stomachs, earning their favor and becoming the kitchen's god. He opened the Hero Shop interface, much to Rachel's surprise. After spending points on a skill and an item, he revealed his purchase as a cooking skill ranked F costing 50 points, and a seasoning loaded with MSG for 20 points. Rachel looked at him in disbelief, scolding him for wasting points on salt. Hyun-suk dismissed her criticism, explaining that she was underestimating its potential. He demonstrated by sprinkling the seasoning over the meat. The transformation was immediate. The aroma became rich, and the meat turned juicy and inviting. Hyun-suk felt triumphant, imagining himself as the god of this new culinary world. He presented the enhanced meat to Kolkin, who initially declined, saying he was already full. But Hyun-suk insisted, claiming he had poured his soul into the dish, and could die happy if Kolkin tasted it. Reluctantly, Kolkin took a bite. The flavor transported him back to his childhood, where his mother had asked if he wanted meat for dinner. The memory was so vivid that it brought tears to his eyes. Afterward, Hyun-suk left with a bag of meat, a gift from Kolkin, who reminded him that it would stay fresh for only 2 days. When Hyun-suk returned, Bobo charged at him, startling him. He handed over the meat, and Bobo calmed down instantly. Hyun-suk encouraged Bobo to eat to his heart's content, pulling out every piece of meat from the bag. Bobo devoured it happily, and Hyun-suk even promised to bring more tomorrow, earning a boost in Bobo's affinity. This also completed their hero quest, awarding them 200 hero points, exactly as Hyun-suk had planned. Rachel noticed his success and pointed out an item on his screen that could enhance his stats. When she asked why he hadn't used it, Hyun-suk explained that he avoided it because he didn't know how it worked, blaming certain idiots who had skipped the tutorial. Rachel, unfazed, reassured him that it wasn't too late and began explaining how bonus points worked. Strength increased power, stamina boosted endurance and resilience, agility improved reflexes and speed, and mana related to magic. When Hyunuk asked about charisma, Rachel clarified that it was a hidden stat that couldn't be leveled up with bonus points, but only through proper training. She advised him to balance the stats equally, but Hyun-suk disagreed, believing it would be more effective to focus solely on strength. Rachel was surprised by his thinking. She explained that while focusing on strength might work at first, mana would become crucial as things progressed. A body enhanced by mana, she emphasized, far surpassed one built purely on muscle. Hyun-suk adjusted his points and asked Rachel if the distribution looked good. Rachel reviewed it and admitted it wasn't bad. She then suggested that he visit the shop and buy a fundamental skill for mana control. Curious, Hyun-suk asked what mana control entailed. Rachel explained that it was essentially a skill to help him manage and manipulate his mana efficiently, estimating the cost to be around 100 hero points. Hyun-suk began searching for it in the shop, but found nothing. Rachel was shocked, as it was supposed to be a common item. Disappointed, Hyun-suk muttered how he thought she'd finally be useful. Frustrated, he even accused her of being completely useless. Rachel defended herself, insisting the item should have been there. 3 weeks later, Hyun-suk reached level 100, though it had taken longer than expected. Rachel remarked that the experience points required increased significantly as he leveled up. Hyun-suk wondered if any other heroes were working as hard as he was. Rachel informed him that he had already become a sinecure. Hyun-suk found that hard to believe and berated Rachel, reminding her of the countless times he had nearly died that day. Rachel explained that most people took about 6 months to reach level 100. She added with some sadness that she wanted to get along with him, but Hyun-suk retorted that she had brought it upon herself. Just then, the door opened, and a goblin entered, informing Hyun-suk that the commander wanted to see him. When Hyun-suk arrived at Hemis's office, she greeted him warmly, remarking that he looked healthier than before and had clearly grown stronger. She noticed that his mana had doubled. Hyun-suk explained that he had been working hard to provide the best quality meat for Bobo every day. However, he commented on how rapidly his strength was increasing. Himis asked if it had something to do with the hero leveling system. Hyun-suk froze, realizing that Himis knew he was a hero. He wondered how long she had known. Himis reassured him that she had figured it out the first time they met. Hyun-suk asked her how she had known, and she explained that she had a connection to someone who was deeply interested in heroes. Finally, he asked why she had summoned him. Hyun-suk tried to guess, mentioning his recent battles. She reminded him of their promise and asked if he remembered it. When Hyun-suk affirmed that he did, she scolded him for his behavior. Suddenly, Himis transformed into a monstrous flower-eating creature. She expressed her frustration with how quickly he was leveling and warned him to work harder if he wanted to survive. For her, it was all about entertainment. Hyun-suk recalled how crowds are most thrilled not by flashy performances or easy victories, but by dramatic, unexpected twists. He realized she had set him up against an opponent he could never hope to beat. Rachel panicked, yelled, asking what his plan was. Hyun-suk told her to stay calm and let him think. He reasoned that his best course of action was to gather as much information as possible about the opponent before the battle. He intended to study their strength carefully. Rachel pointed out that they only had the opponent's name, questioning how he planned to identify them. Hyun-suk revealed his plan to buy an item from the hero shop, called the Combat Power Meter. The device, costing 50 hero points, would measure an individual's strength, stamina, agility, and mana. He intended to use it to gauge his opponent's power level, and then train against someone with a similar level. Rachel sighed, teasing him for only being clever in critical moments. Hyun-suk fired back, saying it was better than always being useless. They tested the combat power meter on Rachel first. Her combat power was 375. She admitted she couldn't tell if that was high or low, so she suggested measuring Hyun-suk's next. He handed her the device and waited for the results. However, Rachel appeared confused. Hyun-suk asked if she had seen anything. Rachel hesitated, then claimed the device must be broken, as she couldn't comprehend why his stats were higher than hers. Hyun-suk's strength was revealed to be 1,560. He smugly asked Rachel if she was sure she wasn't the weaker one between the two of them. Rachel, feeling dejected, admitted she had a strength level of 10,000 just a month ago. Hyun-suk asked if the combat power meter had worked properly despite her doubts. They then checked Bobo's combat strength, and the damn dog had an insane 47,422 strength. Rachel felt utterly humiliated knowing that both she and Hyun-suk were weaker than a dog. Hyun-suk found the situation amusing, joking that maybe Bobo's breed had received a buff. Stepping outside, he decided to survey the strength levels of other orcs. He noticed that goblins, who looked the weakest, had considerably lower stats compared to the other orcs, most of whom had numbers comparable to his own. Suddenly, someone announced Captain Bulkman's arrival, prompting everyone to salute. As the captain passed by, Hyun-suk used the combat power meter and discovered Bulkman's strength was an impressive 14,300. Hyun-suk observed that individuals with combat strength over 10,000 typically held commander-level positions. He turned to Rachel and confirmed whether his opponent was truly a platoon leader. Rachel affirmed this, adding that the opponent's name was Kirkin. Rumor had it Kirkin was an orc with the intelligence of a pig. Hyun-suk reasoned that a platoon leader should only have around 3,000 strength, meaning he might have a shot if he leveled up a bit more. Determined, he began searching for Kirkin. When he finally found him, the combat power meter showed Kirkin's strength at 6C71. Rachel bluntly stated that the situation essentially meant Hyun-suk was being sent to die. At that moment, Hyun-suk received a hero quest. The system window displayed a notification his odds of defeating Kirkin were almost zero. However, because persevering through impossible situations was his defining trait, he was being given a chance. He needed to raise his combat strength to 3,000 within a week. The reward 300 hero points. Hyun-suk sarcastically commented on how perfectly timed the quest was, jokingly wondering if the system was spying on him. Despite the grim odds, he accepted the challenge, realizing it was a do-or-die situation. He resolved to outwit both his observer and Himis in order to survive. The next morning, in the kitchen, Hyun-suk made his presence known. Kulkin greeted him and took note of the goggles Hyun-suk was wearing. Finding them intriguing, he asked where Hyun-suk had gotten them. Hyun-suk casually replied that he'd seen others wearing them, and decided to get a pair himself. Kulkin speculated it must be a trend among the younger generation before quickly changing the topic. He instructed Hyun-suk to get ready for the hunt. Curious, Hyun-suk used the combat power meter on Kulkin and discovered his strength was an overwhelming 35-30. This perplexed Hyun-suk, as it far exceeded the typical strength of a captain. Looking around, he realized even the other cooks had high combat strength due to their constant battles with demonic beasts. This gave Hyun-suk an idea. If he could spar against someone with a similar strength level to Kulkin, he could prepare himself better for the upcoming fight. He requested permission from Kulkin to spar with one of the cooks, explaining that it would help him improve and contribute more effectively. Kulkin initially dismissed the idea, stating that Hyun-suk was already strong enough for a human and didn't need to rush things. However, Hyun-suk subtly threatened him, saying he'd eat the high-quality meat for himself if he wasn't allowed to spar. Reluctantly, Kulkin relented and asked him to choose his sparring partner. Later, as the cooks prepared for the hunt, they were surprised to learn that Hyun-suk was planning to fight Gorbachev, a cook with a combat strength of 260-20. Some wondered if this would be Hyun-suk's last day alive. The goblins, however, voiced their discontent. They didn't want to lose Hyun-suk, who provided them with delicious meat. Hearing the commotion, Kulkin silenced the goblins and warned Gorbachev not to kill Hyun-suk during the sparring session. He instructed him to go easy and not overdo it. Gorbachev, looking rather dim-witted, agreed. Kulkin didn't seem entirely convinced by Hyun-suk's intentions. Still, the sparring match began. Filled with determination, Hyun-suk charged at Gorbachev. As Gorbachev swung a heavy punch, he recalled Kulkin's warning not to kill Hyun-suk. Dodging quickly, Hyun-suk noticed that Gorbachev fought mostly on instinct. Taking advantage of that, he launched a swift counter. The fight felt strangely familiar, like the many battles he had already won. In just moments, it was over. Hyun-suk stood victorious. The goblins were stunned. Gorbachev had gone down so fast, some of them didn't even realize the match had started. Even Hyun-suk was surprised. He had defeated Gorbachev with a single kick. The sudden win gave him new confidence. Maybe he really did stand a chance against Kulkin. At the northern edge of the Black Fortress, near the Great Forest, Hyun-suk replayed the fight in his mind. Knocking out an orc with double his combat strength in one hit made him think. Maybe those numbers didn't matter as much as people believed. With a bit more training, he might actually win his next match easily. Just then, a goblin came running to Kulkin, reporting that a group of Talis had been spotted ahead. Kulkin frowned and asked if they had entered Tala territory. Jensenuk, overhearing, asked what the issue was. Was it because Tala meat tasted bad? Kulkin explained it wasn't the taste. Their bone marrow was actually considered a delicacy. The real problem was that Talis lived in groups, and were fiercely protective of their young. Attacking them could lead to serious consequences. Hyun-suk assumed they'd call off the hunt, but Kulkin had other ideas. Craving the meat, he ordered everyone to charge. They would eat Tala meat today. No survivors. Kill them all. The Talis looked like spiders with skull-like shells. During the battle, Hyun-suk nudged a goblin aside and used the moment to land final hits, collecting more experience points. One by one, the Talis fell. Hyun-suk finished the last one himself and leveled up. Rachel, watching, complimented him for being good at stealing last hits. He accepted the praise, saying this was exactly why he liked working in the kitchen. Suddenly, a heavy pressure filled the air. Hyun-suk froze. A scream rang out. The Tala Queen had arrived. Her rage was undeniable as she saw the bodies of her fallen kin. She let out a furious growl. Curious, Hyun-suk quickly used his goggles to read her stats. But her power couldn't be measured. That's when the truth hit him. They had just killed all her children. He turned to ask the chef what to do, only to see him already running away. The chef shouted for everyone to survive and meet again later. Hyun-suk gritted his teeth at the chef's cowardice. But before he could dwell on it, a thunderous noise caught his attention. Someone yelled for the group to scatter. All around, weaker goblins were being ripped apart as the Talus Queen shrieked so loudly that Hyen-suk had to cover his ears. Rachel shouted for him to look behind. As he turned, he saw a swarm of Talus rushing at him, the queen leading the charge. Instinct took over. He ran as fast as he could, the cries of goblins echoing behind him. Stopping wasn't an option. If he slowed down, he'd die. Eventually, he spotted a cave and hesitated, wondering if it was safe to enter. Rachel insisted it was empty, saying she'd checked it earlier. Hyen-suk wasn't sure he trusted her, but compared to the open forest, the cave seemed like a safer bet. Inside, the cave turned out to be deeper than he expected. He asked Rachel if it was natural. She didn't know but noted how huge it was. Big enough for the Talus Queen herself. That gave Hyen-suk an uneasy feeling. Then he noticed something slimy smeared on the wall. Rachel brushed off the idea that it could be a Talus nest, reminding him that the chef had claimed no Talus lived nearby. Still, the sticky texture worried Hyen-suk. Were these webs? Then he saw them. Eggs. Realization hit. This was a nest. It wasn't safe after all. He turned to leave, but glowing green eyes appeared in the dark. A fully grown Talus lunged at him. Hyen-suk bolted again, Rachel shouting in his ear, asking if he knew where he was going. He admitted he didn't. This was his first time in the cave too. Suddenly, he stepped on something and lost his balance, slipping hard. In a panic, he grabbed the first object nearby and threw it at the approaching Talus. To his surprise, the creature caught it midair. It was an egg. The Talus froze, seemingly distracted by the egg. Hyen-suk looked at Rachel in confusion. She guessed the Talus might have been drawn to the egg's round, smooth, and damp texture. It reminded it of its own. Seeing an opportunity, Hyen-suk grabbed another egg and waved it in the air, taunting the creature and saying he wouldn't take any more of its nonsense. The Talus visibly panicked. It was working. Planting his feet, Hyen-suk tossed the egg with purpose. The Talus scrambled to catch it, reacting as if it were desperate. Rachel noted how agile and strong the creature looked, likely due to its monstrous nature. She asked Hyen-suk what his next move would be. Frustrated, he pointed out that there were still over 100 eggs around. What could he even do? Yet, despite the danger, he kept provoking the Talus. When one egg cracked, he laughed and teased it, saying even he could catch better than that. Hyen-suk told Rachel to bring him another egg, but she informed him it was the last one. His face turned pale as panic set in. He realized he'd gone too far. The Talus let out an enraged growl and charged. Reacting fast, Hyen-suk ordered Rachel to cast a buff spell. Though the Talus Queen looked furious, Hyen-suk could tell she was already worn out from chasing after the eggs. He took a deep breath and steadied his stance, ready to end it. As the Queen lunged at him, Hyen-suk launched his ultimate move, Paradise Reincarnation Shot. Rather than dodge, he met her head on, landing a devastating blow that brought her down. System messages flashed in front of him. He had leveled up. Rachel rushed over, asking if he was okay. Hyen-suk replied honestly. It felt like he was dying. He suggested they move somewhere safer. To his surprise, Rachel mentioned she could use healing magic too. Hyen-suk praised her, saying putting points into mana had definitely paid off. But Rachel admitted her healing was weak and only good for stopping bleeding. Hyen-suk used his newly earned stat points prepared to leave, now at level 8. His updated stats were Strength 56, Pulse 2, Agility 3, Stamina 5, Mana 53, Tolts 2, and Charisma 27. The balanced numbers gave him a small sense of pride, even if he wasn't entirely sure how to use them yet. He saw it as a step toward future growth. Just then, a familiar voice echoed through the cave. It was Kolkin, relieved to find Hyen-suk still alive. Hyen-suk asked what he was doing there. Kolkin said he'd stumbled into the cave while fleeing and considered it a stroke of luck they were all still standing. But he stopped in his tracks when he realized where they were. The Tala's nest. He glanced at the scattered items around them. Hyen-suk explained they were eggs, the place where Talus laid them. Kolkin's eyes lit up. He exclaimed that Tala's eggs were a rare luxury, usually reserved for elite officials. Annoyed, Hyen-suk told him to get serious. They needed to get out. Kolkin muttered that if the queen was nearby, They were doomed without someone at division commander level or higher. He sighed and said maybe the egg would be his final meal. Suddenly, voices came from the entrance. The surviving goblins had made it back, along with the head chef. Culkin welcomed them and offered a taste of the rare eggs. Meanwhile, Hyansuk clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to die, not before tasting his wife's 5-dish meal. He made a silent promise to survive no matter what. Elsewhere, in Himis' office, someone greeted the commander, casually noting his usual stiff demeanor. She asked if he had completed his mission. Reborn reported that he had captured the Holy Empire's next saint, just as ordered. Himis was impressed. She praised Reborn for managing to infiltrate a fanatic cult in only 3 weeks. As she patted his head, he blushed slightly, but their moment was cut short by a knock on the door. Himis, annoyed, commented on the bad timing. A goblin entered with an urgent report about the cooks who had gone out to collect ingredients. At first, Himis dismissed it, thinking it was something minor, but the goblin explained the matter was serious. The Talus Queen had appeared, and most of the cooks, including Culkin, were now dead or missing. When asked about Hyansuk, the goblin confirmed that he too was missing. Reborn's cheerful expression immediately turned grim. Back in the cave, the goblins were already toasting with Tala's eggs, accepting their fate. Culkin even began to say his goodbyes, but Hyansuk hit him on the head and shouted for him to snap out of it. Culkin looked confused, as if asking what was wrong. Hyansuk replied that he must have been under some strange spell and claimed to have used a secret weapon to wake him up. Grinning, Hyansuk pulled out a new item, the Beast Encyclopedia, Demonic Beast Edition. This book held detailed knowledge on nearly every kind of demonic beast and cost 50 hero points to obtain. Hyansuk searched through the pages, looking for information on the Taz, a spider-like demonic beast that lived in colonies and had powerful legs. The book noted that its weak spots were the torso and head. It also said that Tao's bodily fluids were extremely flammable and that their eggs contained substances as explosive as bombs. The caves made from their saliva were also highly flammable, making fire magic inside them extremely risky. Hyansuk asked Culkin if he could use fire magic. Culkin admitted he could, but only basic spells like shooting flames. He warned Hyansuk that fire wouldn't pierce the Tao's thick outer shell, but Hyansuk calmly said he wasn't planning to burn the Tao's directly. Gathering the group, Hyansuk shared his plan. He reminded them that if they wanted to enjoy more rare food, like Tao's eggs, they had to survive. The goblins thought his plan was hopeless, but Hyansuk tempted them with a promise, an endless banquet of the finest demonic beast meat, if they made it out alive. That changed everything. Their eyes lit up with hope, and even Culkin started drooling at the thought. He eagerly asked what they had to do. Satisfied with their enthusiasm, Hyansuk gave them the details. The most important thing was to keep running until they reached the exit. Once the plan was clear, the group set out. Soon after, they ran into a swarm of Taos. Hyansuk gave the signal, and Culkin launched his fire magic. At just the right time, part of the cave exploded from the blast. Rachel observed the chaos and asked Hyansuk what he had done. He explained that by allowing the fire to spread, the remaining eggs deeper in the cave would act as a distraction, keeping the Taos occupied long enough for them to escape. Hyansuk instructed the goblins to stay focused on surviving, and to throw an egg as a diversion if needed. With only one egg left in his possession, they had to locate the exit before using it. As they pressed on, Rachel spotted light ahead. Hyansuk guided the group toward it, urging them to keep running. Relief washed over them when they reached the light, but it was short-lived. Standing in their path was the Tao's queen. Hyansuk's expression darkened as the massive creature blocked their way. Culkin, equally dismayed, whispered that the queen had returned, believing their doom was imminent. But Hyansuk refused to give up. He noticed the queen wasn't attacking them outright. Sensing an opportunity, he addressed her directly. He instructed Culkin to ignite something, then held up the last egg, threatening to detonate it. Hyansuk warned, "We all die, your offspring included." The queen hesitated, her gaze fixed on the egg. Hyansuk intensified his demand, urging her to step aside. The queen screeched loudly, causing tension to rise. Rachel anxiously asked what they should do next. Hyun-suk, out of ideas, lit the egg and hurled it toward the cave wall. The egg detonated, igniting a fire that spread rapidly. The ground trembled as the cave began to collapse. The goblins, terrified, scrambled to escape. Hyun-suk shouted for everyone to prioritize getting out alive. But as he fled, he suddenly froze, distracted by a system notification. He had leveled up. Rachel, exasperated, yelled at him to move before he was buried in the rubble. Glancing back, Hyun-suk saw the Tao's queen being crushed beneath the falling debris. More notifications flooded his vision. He had leveled up repeatedly. The realization hit him: all the Taos killed in the collapse had counted as experience points. This was, without a doubt, speedy XP farming at its finest. Hyun-suk stood there dumbfounded. Before deciding to focus on escaping, he called out to Rachel for a buff, which she promptly provided. Emerging from the chaos, they faced one final challenge. The Queen Tao was still in their way. Kulkin, desperate to create a diversion, pulled out an egg and shouted, "This is for you, Queen." He offered the Queen an egg in exchange for a way out. Hyun-suk recognized it as an opportunity. Determined to survive, he sprinted with all his might. The Queen spat a green fluid resembling spider silk, and Hyun-suk began to wonder if this was truly the end for him. Suddenly, red hands grabbed hold of a large trunk. A familiar voice asked if he was all right. Hyun-suk realized he was being dragged. To his astonishment, it was Reborn. Reborn was visibly pleased to find Hyun-suk alive, just as he had anticipated. Hyun-suk confidently declared that he would handle the situation. Reborn wielded the massive trunk and struck the Tao's queen with a devastating blow. The queen emitted a deafening screech as Reborn assumed a combat stance. Hyun-suk couldn't hold back his admiration and exclaimed how incredible Reborn was. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Later, at the Demon King's Black Castle, they discovered grim news. Out of the 105 goblin packs in the Demon King's army, only 6 had survived. 99 were either dead or missing, including Kulkin. In Bobo's room, the enormous beast whimpered and clung to Hyun-suk, straddling him like a child. Hyun-suk consoled the emotional Bobo, teasingly saying he had returned from the dead just to see him. Rachel commented on how fortunate they were to have survived, crediting the cow-headed figure. Meanwhile, Bobo kept licking Hyun-suk's face affectionately. Hyun-suk replied to Rachel, saying they should cherish their moments of peace, as the looming finals could very well get them killed. Rachel asked for clarification. Hyun-suk explained that finals were approaching fast. Rachel observed that Hyun-suk had matured significantly, and she wasn't wrong. Thanks to the collapsed cave, Hyun-suk had gained a staggering 75 levels in one fell swoop. His current level stood at 200, but Rachel remarked that it still felt inadequate. Hyun-suk shared her sentiment, especially when faced with an opponent boasting over 6,000 battle power. Rachel tested him with a question. Would attaining 6,000 battle power make him as strong as an orc? Hyun-suk replied that it wasn't solely about power level. Rachel confirmed his answer, explaining that such strength also relied on magic. She urged him to master magic if he hoped to confront such adversaries. Hyun-suk admitted it wasn't as simple as it sounded. Rachel reminded him of a moment when he had inadvertently used magic in the past. Hyun-suk, puzzled, was unaware of having done so. Rachel confessed that it was far too basic to be called magic. Hyun-suk finally understood that the surge of power he had felt back then was indeed magic. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when the door swung open. Both were caught off guard as Reborn entered. Hyun-suk asked why someone like Reborn would visit such a modest room. Reborn informed him that he was there to summon him to meet the great commander at Hemis' office. When Hemis saw Reborn, she inquired about his unusual presence. Reborn explained that he had a personal matter to discuss. He requested permission to teach Hyun-suk the art of battle. Hyun-suk was shocked. He asked for the reasoning behind this. Reborn explained that Orc Harkin, a platoon leader, had been exhibiting extraordinary potential and seemed suited for the position of deputy battalion commander. If things continued this way, Hyun-suk was certain to lose. Reborn expressed his belief in Hyun-suk's immense potential and his desire to witness what Hyun-suk could achieve in the future. Hyun-suk was dumbfounded, certain the commander would reject the proposal. To his surprise, Hemus approved. Redran expressed his gratitude, and Hemus dismissed them, noting that she had work to attend to before they left. She acknowledged how much stronger Hyeonsuk had grown since their last meeting. While she admired his rapid progress, it also irritated her, as it posed a threat to Kirkin. She resolved to give Kirkin something to level the playing field. Redran led Hyeonsuk to his personal training ground, a vast space that left Hyeonsuk in awe. He reflected on how much respect Hemus had for Redran. Observing Hyeonsuk in silence, Redran noticed that his body was brimming with mana, but he couldn't utilize it. It became clear to him that Hyeonsuk's rapid growth had left little time for mastering the basics, and with the battle only 4 days away, there wasn't enough time. Redran concluded that there was only one solution. Clenching his fist, he declared that pain was an essential part of growth. Advising Hyeonsuk to stay alert, he delivered a punch directly to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Hyeonsuk couldn't help but question if Redran had lost his mind. He was supposed to be training him, yet Redran was beating him to a pulp. Hyeonsuk shouted at Redran to focus, tell him he'd die if he didn't learn to block with mana. Determined, Hyeonsuk tried to shield himself from Redran's incoming kick by raising his forearm. He quickly leapt backward to create distance. Gathering his strength, Hyeonsuk launched a counter kick. Redran found it peculiar. Though Hyeonsuk's physical strength was nothing remarkable, his reaction speed and perceptiveness were on par with that of a seasoned knight. Redran recognized that Hyeonsuk's fighting spirit was extraordinary. It became clear to Redran that it wasn't by sheer luck that Hyeonsuk's kick had landed. Hyeonsuk's combat instincts were refined to an astonishing degree. Trusting Hyeonsuk's innate sense of battle, Redran planned his next move. He reminded Hyeonsuk of the wager with the commander, emphasizing that without mastering mana, he had no chance of defeating Kirkin. With cold resolve, he added that it was better to die here than face defeat in front of everyone. Then, with a powerful punch, Redran hurled Hyeonsuk into the air. Hyeonsuk realized in that moment that Redran wasn't bluffing. Another hit like that could actually kill him. His mind wandered to his unfulfilled dream of getting married and having adorable children. But Redran wasn't giving him time to reminisce. He was already pursuing Hyeonsuk midair, leaving him with only 2 choices, die or block the attack. Praying to God, Hyeonsuk clenched his fist and prepared to retaliate. The next moment, the ground trembled from the impact of someone crashing into it. That someone was Hyeonsuk. The force of his landing shattered a significant portion of the terrain. Rachel, standing nearby, was visibly alarmed. Redran approached Hyeonsuk's motionless body, observing him carefully. He declared that Hyeonsuk had just managed to control his own mana for the first time and asked if he had noticed, raising his hand weakly. Hyeonsuk gave a thumbs up, joking that God had answered his prayers. His ridiculous expression made Redran chuckle. Redran reassured him, saying he'd win if he kept progressing like this. He grabbed Hyeonsuk's arm and told him to stay still so he could heal him. But as soon as Redran began, Hyeonsuk let out a groan of pain, clutching his neck. Redran had forgotten an important detail. Dark mana was toxic to humans. Realizing his mistake, Redran apologized profusely, scooping Hyeonsuk into his arms and urging him to stay alive. In this world, certain powers naturally countered each other. Dark mana countered regular mana, mana countered divine power, and divine power countered dark mana. Mana was the domain of humans, dark mana belonged to demons, and divine power was reserved for the devout followers of God. The Church of Tusis, the most influential religious institution, had waged wars to bring all other faiths under its control. Now, as the divine empire of Gatron, they had anointed a chosen individual capable of hearing God's voice, revering her as the saint. Within the Demon King's stronghold, rumors swirled about the captured saint locked in her room. Abelson Mariot, the next saint of the divine empire, was now a prisoner of the demon army. There were murmurs of doubt among the demons. She hadn't prayed in days, casting suspicion on her claim as the saint. Still, they trusted Redran's judgment in capturing her. Abelson, on the other hand, saw no reason to pray. She believed her current circumstances were better than her time in the church. Suddenly, The door burst open and Redran barged in, carrying Hyansuk in his arms. Abelson immediately chastised him for his rudeness. Ignoring her, Redran demanded that she heal the human. Hyansuk's head throbbed, and he began to wonder what Redran had done to him. It was almost comical. His last thought was regretting that the last hand he had held belonged to a man instead of Rachel. When he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the sight of a silver-haired beauty. His immediate thought was that he had died again and ended up in some random place. Hyansuk began lamenting loudly, claiming he would never forgive the angel for this. He dramatically declared that he'd rather become an archmage by the age of 30 than go through this again. Praying fervently, he cursed Rachel, accusing her of being a demon disguised as an angel, and demanded eternal torment for her. Finally, he muttered one last wish: if the angel insisted on making him a hero again, she should marry him first. Abelson, unimpressed, called him pathetic. Hyansuk's eyes widened in shock. Redran, relieved that Hyansuk was conscious, couldn't help but grab his shirt in excitement. Still dazed, Hyansuk was utterly confused. Redran pulled him into a tight hug, but Hyansuk immediately protested, accusing him of trying to kill him again. In that moment, Hyansuk realized he wasn't dead after all. Turning around, Hyansuk glanced at Abelson, piecing together the embarrassing things he had just said in front of her. Redran, meanwhile, asked the Saintess if Hyansuk was fully healed. The Saintess responded that Hyansuk was not yet fully recovered, and pointed out that it should be evident to Redran as well that the dark mana still lingered in his body. She admitted that she didn't know what might happen to him. Redran asked if her divine power couldn't erase the dark mana. Abelson warned that any misstep could result in Hyansuk's death. She suggested waiting, as the dark mana might dissipate over time. Apologizing sincerely, Redran promised to make amends by helping Hyansuk grow stronger through training. Despite being nearly suffocated by the hug, Hyansuk managed to remark that Redran didn't need to go to such lengths for someone as lowly as him. Redran dragged him away, but Hyansuk protested, asking him to wait. Meanwhile, Abelson grew curious about Hyansuk, wondering why a human was being trained by a demon. A few hours later, Hyansuk finally made it back to his room. Bobo, as usual, was there, playfully chewing on Hyansuk's head. Hyansuk thanked Bobo, recalling that Bobo had destroyed his home and eaten the soldier who tried to feed him. Once again, Hyansuk thanked him, acknowledging that if it weren't for Bobo's separation anxiety, he'd still be stuck in training. Hyansuk began venting to Bobo about everything that had happened that day. It was enough to make him cry. And to top it all off, the dark mana was still coursing through him. Looking up, he asked Rachel if he was going to die. Bobo simply kept licking Hyansuk. Hyansuk called for Rachel again, but she didn't respond. Rachel was crying, devastated that her hero had been ruined and corrupted. She told him that he wasn't the same hero anymore. Hyansuk was taken aback. Shouldn't he be the one crying after everything he had just been through? Eventually, Rachel calmed down and confessed that all of the misfortunes were her fault, the dark mana in Hyansuk's body, his near-death experience. It was all on her. With biting sarcasm, she added that it was because she was a demon wearing an angel's face, a deranged maniac destined to suffer eternal torment in hell. Hyansuk froze, recognizing those very words as the ones he had said to the Saintess. Upon waking up and realizing his mistake, he scrambled to